Hello, Goffstown. I'm Jim Craig, and I'm your host for today's session of Goffstown Today, the local public affairs program brought to you by the Goffstown Democratic Committee. You know, nowadays, people disagree on the role of government in our daily lives. Some say it should be minimal, pick up the garbage and fix potholes. The other extreme says it should be involved in most of all the issues in our daily lives. People seldom think that this country has a long tradition of private charities and religious organizations being involved in our lives, spiritually, politically, and charitably. Today, we're fortunate to have with us Reverend Jason Wells, the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Council of Churches. Reverend Wells was ordained in 2004 and has served many years at New Hampshire Episcopal Churches. He holds a Master of Divinity degree from Princeton Theological Seminary and bachelor's degrees in computer science and mathematics from Southern Methodist University. He's been a board member of the ACLU New Hampshire, a former president of the Greater Concord Interfaith Council, and a member of the Episcopal Church's Committee on Ecumenical and Interfaith Relationships. Welcome to Goffstown Today, Reverend Wells. Thank you for
Great. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm glad to be with you.
Let's start off. What denominations are members of the council and how is it governed?
Great. Thank you. The New Hampshire Council of Churches is made up of 9 different denominations of churches in the state of New Hampshire. So that would include American Baptist churches, Episcopalians like myself, Greek Orthodox, Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Quakers, the United Church of Christ or Congregationalists, as well as Unitarian Universalists. So it's a real diversity, Unitarians, Quakers, Baptists, Greek Orthodox. It's a broad group of Christian traditions. And the way that we govern ourselves is that each one of those denominations has some sort of a leader. Many of them have bishops. Some denominations do not, but they have other clergy who are important leaders. And either they or representatives that they appoint come together about once a month. And really, they direct me on the kinds of programs that they would like to see enacted, the things they can do better together than apart. I can go into some specific things, or to find places where they have sort of broad unanimous agreement on the places when we do sort of legislative advocacy and bring our faith values into the public square.
That's interesting. I was reading on the internet that it's been around since 1945. Which surprised me, and yes. I wonder how it's evolved over that, the history of it. Is it still the same thing that it was in 1945, or how has it evolved?
Yeah. So the sort of movement of having a council of churches like this started, after World War II, around 1945. Is around the same time you saw the United Nations coming about. I think there's a great spirit for working together and cooperating in the light of the ending of 2 world wars. And in those eras, into the 1950s and 60s, much of the conversation in a council of churches was just getting over preconceptions about each other, trying to just make a reason to cooperate between Catholics and Protestants and different kinds of churches that may have historically not cooperated before. So some of that was about reducing bias and prejudice. And in this day and age, we actually work quite well together and are quite ready to come together and cooperate, to share programs, to strengthen each other's programs, not out of a sense of competition, but of cooperation. And to realize that many of our values that we have in our faith are identical and that we want to express them together in the public square.
That's interesting because, as you know, our politics today are so scattered and there's no togetherness and there doesn't seem like there ever can be any togetherness. And you're describing the council as still working together, and has that affected the council, the way the politics has kind of segregated themselves into conservatives and liberal Democrats, or what, liberals anyways?
Great question. Yeah, I think on the one hand, yes. I mean, we certainly see in our churches the same kinds of division that we see in our society at large. Many clergy I talk to in New Hampshire are able to articulate that, right through the middle of their congregation is, there's a sort of a boundary of sort of progressives and conservatives, or however you might want to phrase that the partisan divide affects our churches. One thing out of that I take some hope in is that the kind of work that the Council of Churches does is really to be able to express the fact that there are things among our churches that we do not agree on. That a person who's Greek Orthodox, a person who's Baptist, and a person who's Unitarian Universalist, they might have very different beliefs within their Christian tradition. But even though we disagree, there are things we work together on, and we work together despite our different opinions. So I would like to hope that the kind of work that we do in sort of our interfaith work is something of a light in our tunnel when it seems like our partisan divides will keep us apart forever. I really have a hope that the faith community can help to lead us forward.
I hope you're right about that. I hope you're right about that, because I don't know what else is going to fix things. But right, there are a lot of groups like you that still talk to each other and that can still disagree and yet still do some good. So that's encouraging. So what we're going to talk about a little bit of legislative stuff, but what else does the council do other than keep an eye on the legislature? Are there other?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that has consumed our churches and the council as well, of course, has been the COVID pandemic. This is something that has affected all of our churches in a lot of the same ways. No matter what our differences are, almost all of us have buildings where we get together, we sing, people shake hands and hug, and those are all things that we don't do anymore. So part of what we have been doing as a council has been to try to bring together those various denominational and church leaders. We actually very successfully over the past year worked together to work with Governor Sununu's office on the places of worship guidance that would set out some of the policies about what churches would and would not do under the emergency orders. And then come together to make sure we were communicating clearly and well with churches to reduce confusion, to make things as clear as possible. It's been a great example of how well we can work together with things that affect all of us in much the same way. So that's one area where we've been working a great deal.
So I'm just thinking as you're talking, the council get together and come up with like an agenda of things for the year or whatever that they want to concentrate on. Is that how? And
there are some things that change. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
Okay, sorry, a little internet blip there. There are things that change year to year. As you well know, the legislative agenda can be unpredictable, and we are sometimes responding to bills that are in the legislature. But there have been some very long-term campaigns within the Council of Churches. One of them that comes to mind has been our work to repeal the death penalty, which was a success in 2019. We repealed the death penalty in New Hampshire, and we were, as a council, we're bringing together faith voices, which were almost always in some version, a pro-life voice against the death penalty. It was something we were unanimous on. But that was a campaign to repeal the death penalty that had been going on since 1985. There was no one-year plan to repeal the death penalty. That was a 30-year campaign, which required sort of long-term vision. And the other area where we work a lot together for a sort of long-term organizing has been around addiction and recovery. Many of our churches have 12-step programs or other substance use recovery programs, and that's taken a new urgency in the sort of opioid crisis, but has existed before this. One of our members will always remind us, as much as we are concerned for the opioid crisis and the people suffering there, that alcohol will continue to be our biggest addiction problem in the state. So there are things that we are working on that are not just one-year campaigns, but are long-term efforts to bring the churches together to work on something that's in front of us.
Do you have a budget to put into things that you care about and that you work on?
We have a very lean budget. The budget that we do have is contributed largely by those denominations and by some of the congregations that are invested in our work. So it's all voluntary giving. And really most of that budget supports the role of the executive director, if that's me or one of my predecessors. Most of our work is about bringing people together. We have almost all of the experts. We have great people who are very talented and gifted. If they're advocates on recovery or death penalty repeal, the people in our congregations who know things about epidemiology, they're all out there, and our job is to just bring them together. So that's where our programming lies, is connecting people.
Interesting. You talked about some of your campaigns you've been involved in, and I was doing a little bit of research on you before the show, and that came up, the Love Your Neighbor campaign. That kind of piqued my interest. Would you? I assume that's kind of typical of what you were talking about, and what. So just if you could describe that, what that was about.
Yes, yeah, I'd be glad to. Love Your Neighbor was a campaign that really began in Concord. Concord is one of the cities in New Hampshire that has a pretty strong tradition of refugee resettlement. There are many African, Nepalese, and Bhutanese people who have resettled there, people from other countries as well. And in 2011, Concord, one of the refugees' families had their home vandalized with racist graffiti, and there were several incidences of that. And Love Your Neighbor was an effort to express something that is really common to all of our religious traditions. There's hardly a religious group that would disagree that God wants us to love our neighbors as ourselves, to love our neighbors as God loves us. And so that became a point of bringing people of faith together. And very quickly we found people who don't identify as religious people who wanted to love their neighbors as well. You don't have to be a religious person to agree with that. And it was a movement of people who wanted to stand together with their refugee neighbors, whether they were African or South Asian or from somewhere else, to stand with them and say that we don't want there to be any room for hate in New Hampshire, and we want to stand in love with them. Which has gone on to, you can still see Love Your Neighbor signs 10 years later around Concord and around the state, and bumper stickers and such. And it informs a lot of the work that happens in the state on supporting immigrants of all kinds, not just refugees. I'm actually very proud of New Hampshire because a lot of our support for immigrants is really faith-based. There are a lot of our churches and synagogues and such who have really made an effort to express that love of neighbor by supporting our immigrants.
You know, it's so easy to get depressed when you think, listening to the news and things, but I hear enough stories like that I have some hope for the country and where we're going, and so thank you for doing those kind of things, because it makes people like me feel good, when it's really hard to find things to feel good about. But that's probably not true. If you look around, you'll see a lot of people like you working on those kind of things. Now, we did talk about the legislature.
Yeah.
And I understand that your group was involved with I think it's still going on, the right to work issue. And
Yes.
I don't know, I guess it's in the Senate now. And I'm just curious how that came to be an issue for you, and what you were doing about it. Do you actually send speakers over to the legislature and kind of lobby or you know, things? So I'm just curious
Yeah, yeah.
how you go about that. You went about that.
Yes. So yeah, this year, the right to work law is Senate Bill 61. As you well know, it has been in front of our legislature many times over the past decades. Um, yeah, right now it has gone through the Senate. It has gone through a House committee and is waiting for a vote from the full House in the next couple of weeks. I don't know when that will happen. So part of the reality is what we try to do is to bring those denominational leaders together. And one thing that we found among us is we would talk about some of the major issues in front of the legislature, and this support for labor unions and collective bargaining is actually something that all 9 of our denominations have some teaching or statement or document or doctrine affirming. I was actually a little surprised to find that all 9 denominations were unanimous in their support for collective bargaining and labor rights. This was also true, like I mentioned, in the death penalty, that there's some statement from all these denominations that says we have a strong base to support this together. So that meant that we were able to sit down and read through those and sort of consolidate those views and we brought them to the Senate, we brought them to the senators as well as to the House, and just tried to express there are many people of faith in our state who are standing with our working families. And in fact, we wrote a letter that circulated in some newspapers in the state, really expressing that most of our churches revere Reverend Martin Luther King, and reminding our churches that Martin Luther King was assassinated, yes, for his civil rights work, but he was assassinated while standing with the Memphis sanitation workers, standing up for labor rights. And that if we say that we love God, we have to love our neighbors, and that includes our working neighbors. We need to stand with them. And I think even out of self-interest, a church should be able to say, I want the people in my church to make more money because they can be more generous when they have more money. So I have a higher moral standard than that, but at least a self-interest argument.
There's always a bottom line. That's that. So you're saying that not all the denominations like backed right to work or were against right to work, not for all the same reasons, maybe, but they all were there. Did I hear you right? Because that's interesting.
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I think there's actually a very strong set of, they would phrase things maybe a little bit differently, or maybe use a different Bible verse to hang things on. But all of them come out of an expression of the common good, and that our churches ought to be speaking up for the common good and the things that benefit all of us together. Yeah.
That's interesting. That's nice. Did any other bills that you're keeping an eye on this year?
Oh, certainly. It was recently been tabled, but we were watching House Bill 266, which was about sanctuary cities. That is an anti-immigration law, and out of our work in standing with immigrants and immigrant families in the state of New Hampshire, we wanted to ensure that they could be here and be here safely. And one of the ones that has a lot of attention has been, it was just defeated, but House Bill 544, which is the so-called a divisive concepts bill. The bill was defeated, but it lives on in our state budget bill. And this would be a bill that would prohibit our schools and companies contracting with our government from discussing racism and sexism. It was an attempt to say that certain kinds of, I guess, if we see racism as a divisive concept, that we cannot talk about that in certain public settings. And one of the main reasons we oppose this bill has been over the past year, we actually stood with the Jewish community of New Hampshire on supporting a bill on Holocaust and genocide education. It was a bill that went through the Senate unanimously. The governor signed it very proudly, saying that we must have in our public education Holocaust and genocide education. And it's an ongoing work that our faith groups are still supporting today. But this would really undermine the work of having important discussions in our schools about the Holocaust and the effects that it had on our Jewish neighbors, and the other forms of genocide, such as against Native Americans, that we need to be able to discuss. And this attempt to say that we can't talk about difficult conversations is not true, and we need to stand up for the sake. It comes back to the position of loving our neighbor by having the hard conversations we need to have.
Have you taken a position on, that's interesting to me that, again, that some people deny that the Holocaust ever happened, it just blows my mind. But anyway, have you taken a position on voting rights and that whole issue?
The churches have not been outspoken on that. Voting rights has not been a priority for us, though. During the last year, we actually were working less on the bills about voting rights, but on making sure that our churches were able to give good information about voting. We had all of that confusion about absentee balloting and how it would work and what do you need to do. We wanted to make sure that our pastors and church leaders were able to share sort of good, honest information about how to get your vote counted and your voice heard. So we haven't really done legislative work on that as much as organizing work.
We're running out of time, but I wanted to ask you, what's a proud moment for you with the council?
Oh, yeah.
What made you feel happy that you were doing that, that you were where you were doing what you were,
Yeah, I think two things just jump to mind. I'm so proud of the long-term work on death penalty repeal. I mean, we saw, like I said, a 30-year campaign that clergy came and went over those years. And even when we came and went, people came and went from churches, but our faith stayed the same. Our witness stayed the same all those years. And it's hard to face the defeats of all those years, but they kept sticking with it until they found victory for their faith voice. And I've loved seeing different denominations of churches, but all of the faith groups of New Hampshire have really come together around responding to COVID. We have put together an interfaith group. I represent a lot of the Christians, but a group that has Muslims and Jews and Buddhists and others who have come together to talk about how COVID affects all of our religious groups. And it's a movement that I haven't seen before. And it gives me some real hope for what can happen when we do come together.
Well, thank you, Reverend. It's really, I don't know, it makes me feel really good to hear that there are boots on the ground doing good for the right reasons and standing up for the dignity and of all of us, and that's important work. That's God's work, right? So if you want, yes. If you want to leave any contact information, anybody wants to get in touch with you or your organization, feel free.
Yes. So our website is quite simply nhchurches.org, and nhchurches.org. You can get information about us, but my email address and our phone number are there, so we can be reached very easily from that website.
Good. Thank you very much. It's great having you. I really enjoyed this. I hope you did too.
I absolutely did. We can do this again sometime. So
happy to. Thank you. I got to do a little closing here. So
all right.
So thank you. You can watch these programs here on GTV through the video page on our website, goffstowndems.com. by searching for the Goffstown Democrats YouTube channel or on our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/GofftownDems. Please like and share them widely, and thank you for watching.